Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Derrick Smith. I'm with Data National Corporation, and thanks for attending our webinar session. Today, we're going to be talking about offsite backup and disaster recovery for IBM I and the other critical systems that you may have in your environment that feed or interface somehow with your IBM I platform. So this is meant to be a high-level overview. We have a couple different things here. As I go through the information, we do have quite a few folks on the phone, but I'm going to be checking for questions every so often. If you have any questions, feel free to key them into the question text box. This is meant to be high level, so I'm going to try to wrap up right around the 30-minute mark. And if you have any questions that you want to get into any detail or any in-depth discussion on, my information will be posted here on the last slide. So you're welcome to reach out and either call me or send me a quick note. We can get together and talk about your questions. And then I may be prompting for some questions here as we go through some of the information. We do have a wide range audience coming from different platforms. I think mostly on this call, mostly everyone has an IBM I in their environment. I will be perhaps prompting for some survey questions as we go through, just so I can position the content accordingly. So our discussion today, we're going to be talking about really a focus on backup recovery. If you have attended the last few sessions that we've done, a lot of those have been focused on disaster recovery, with backup being a component of it. This is really focused on the backup component and following along with a disaster recovery. So we're going to be talking about the carbonite technology that we use to support all of our customers' backups and restore processes. So I'm going to be talking about how it works, talking about what the recovery process looks like within the platform, and then talk about some of the financial aspects of this, which is really huge, especially if you're a customer that is still using tape technology today. There's a lot of cost savings that we can look at for you in replacing some of the legacy technologies that are out there for supporting backup and restore. So of course, the backbone of any disaster recovery process is your backup. So we're going to be talking about DR a little bit. We're going to be talking about bare metal, what we've used. This is what we call a cloud-based recovery option that I'm going to highlight a little bit. And this has been a great option for a lot of clients out there that can't necessarily cost justify high availability, but they can get a much better recovery time objective than traditional tape-based restore using our approach. So we're going to go into detail on that. And then one section that I did last week that went really well, I got a lot of questions after the presentation, was on endpoint. So endpoint is basically coming up with a backup and restore procedures for all the individual laptops, PCs, devices that you would have in your enterprise. So if you're not offering your users a way to back up their data, what we're finding is most of the time they're finding their own way. So they're using Google Drive, iCloud, Dropbox. So you have corporate data that are out on all these third-party service providers, and it's extremely difficult for you to manage that. So we're going to be talking about a great approach that we have implemented for our clients with centralized management. It uses the same type of technology that we use on the server side with compression and deduplication. So we'll talk briefly on that, and then we have a whole live demo coming up in January focused on that. So stay tuned for details on that capability. We'll go into much deeper information on that presentation. Okay, the Data National disaster recovery story. So just real quick, from our capability standpoint, We are a business continuity provider. We leverage a lot of different partnerships to provide different recovery time objectives, different recovery point objectives, depending on the platform, depending on what you're trying to do. From a company perspective, we don't care what platform you're on. We have a solution that is going to be wrapped in as a turnkey product or turnkey approach for you. And so it's very common for our clients to come to us and say, hey, here's our environment. We want these group of systems to have this type of RTO, these groups of systems to have this RTO, and these RPOs, and we can pull together a turnkey solution for them that delivers and meets all their needs. So we can do this, from stemming from just a PC in your environment to the most critical I-Series system that you would have in your organization. So we do that across the board, both from a backup, the DR or HA perspective. So we deliver to lots of different recovery time objectives depending on what your needs are. We use a lot of these replication tools for migration purposes as well. So if you are looking at maybe moving data centers, or maybe you're migrating from one version of Windows Server to another, or maybe one version of IBM I to another, we can deliver that to you with very little downtime by using a lot of these replication tools to do so. Kind of what we call is migrate while active. Okay, so we do that cross-platform. Backup recovery. So we use a technology called, it was formerly called eVault. It's now called Carbonite Server Backup. So if you've been following the business continuity marketplace for the last 2 or 3 years or so, I guess, you have probably seen a lot of changes with both on the I-Series side and with Vision and now being part of SyncSort, and eVault now being part of Carbonite. Carbonite has been extremely active in the market by acquiring a lot of great technology that gives them a really strong portfolio when it comes to backup and recovery. So the large portion of our audience being IBM I focused, we have used this technology for I-Series customers for probably 15 years now. So it is a very strong solution, very tried and proven solution, and we use this for just your everyday backups and recovery. So not much, just simple file or object or library recovery type procedures. And then we have used this solution for as part of a disaster recovery approach, and we have used this for actual system migration, where customers were actually migrating systems from one location to another, and we use this type of technology to make that happen. So it is now called Carbonite Server Backup. So I may still accidentally refer to it as eVault. So eVault or Carbonite has acquired this solution. They actually have acquired a few other folks as well, with Data Castle, with providing the endpoint protection. They've acquired Double Take as well. I went through this in some of my last week's webinar, talking about some of that and how now we can provide real-time replication all under one portfolio for Windows, I-Series, and all that. So a really nice capability that Carbonite has added over the last few years. From a backup perspective, so with their solution, they use deduplication. So this is really important for a lot of our clients who are doing still old school full system backups on a nightly basis. So we have deduplication. So we're at the block level. So basically, as we go through our process here in a few minutes, we'll be talking about some of that, how we approach ongoing backups. Obviously, we're not going to be backing up stale data every single time. We're going to be going after each of the individual blocks of data that have changed or have been added new on a nightly or a regular basis. we have fantastic compression. So if we're talking about the I series platform, we get 10-to-1 compression within that footprint. So we look at the IFS a little bit differently. So if you're a heavy user of IFS on the I series, we just calculate a little more conservative compression because we're not, customers could be storing lots of different things on that on the IFS. So they could have diagrams and drawings and engineering documents that are very difficult to compress. They're very large files. So, but traditionally, if you have DB2 on I, SQL, Oracle, we've even seen like Progress and AIX get just fantastic compression in those areas. And compression is very, very important, especially as we look at from a pricing standpoint. We price everything out on a compressed footprint as opposed to native, which is really important, especially on the I series. And then from a performance standpoint, so the smaller that we can make your footprint, a lot more efficient we're going to be on an ongoing basis. We also have military grade encryption. So we have 256-bit encryption. So if you looked at a customer list, you would see a lot of law firms, you would see a lot of healthcare companies, life insurance companies, all those organizations that need to adhere to really strict data encryption. This has it built in. So we have worked with a lot of customers who have struggled with tape-based encryption, especially in I series. So you have hardware-based encryption, and then there's also an encryption you can do at the software level, the OS level. It's just extremely cumbersome to work with. It can be very difficult to implement. And using this approach, having that built into the technology is for a lot of customers, a huge win for them. So we'll talk a little bit about that as we go through the process. Tons of options in how we can deploy this. So we talk about here's hybrid cloud flexibility. We can deliver this as a service. So it's mainly all cloud components. We can deliver this as on-prem. So maybe you're not really interested in having a cloud service do this for you. You're more interested in bringing this in-house. And so we can deliver it that way. It's priced differently, so it's more of a capital expense up front, and then as opposed to a cloud, which is more of an operational spend, or maybe you're a combination of. So maybe there's some local backups you want done first, and then have that sent off site to a cloud provider like Data National. And that's certainly an option. So lots of different options to consider, all priced differently depending on what your needs are. So the good news is that there's lots of different options for you to consider, and you can kind of match that up with what you're looking for from a financial and also technical perspective. Okay, so let's look at the architecture here, or from a high-level design standpoint. I'm going to talk about each of the individual components and come back and tie them all together. So the first component is we have an agent. So an agent's a small piece of software that we're going to install on your system. So that the agent has a pretty big responsibility in the solution. That's where we set up all the backup jobs. That's where all the retention periods are set up, and that's where, if I can highlight this, get my highlighter working a little bit. This is where all this transfer process happens, and we'll talk about that in just a minute. As you see here, we have multiple vaults. So I talked about the different deployment strategies. So we can put a component on site. We can put an on-premise vault in where you're backing up locally very quickly, and then either going out off-site to a cloud provider like Data National, or you're going to maybe a secondary site that you have within your enterprise. Either way, the vaults all have the same responsibility. So obviously the vault is responsible for accepting the data that gets sent over to it or backed up to it. It performs some back-end deduplication. It we always have redundancy. So one of the great things about this solution, because we've been in many different, I guess what we would call bake-offs compared to other solutions, where this solution does very, very well is replication offsite. Um, so I would say compression is probably up there, but in terms of replication and getting your data offsite or sharing that data across different vaults for redundancy, this is where um, Carbonite does extremely well, and we've been in some pretty competitive comparisons with clients. We are actually just wrapping one up with an AIX customer this month. So one of the great things about this is the ability to send your data off-site to multiple locations for disaster recovery protection. So if anything going to our vault at Data National gets sent off to a secondary location. So we have multiple vaults with multiple locations, depending on what geographic location you want. The guy up there in the lab coat, he represents our managed services team. So our managed services team that we have here is responsible for watching and monitoring the backups that are being sent over to it. So we have several thousands of jobs that run on a regular basis or nightly basis that this team watches over and monitors for different things. So we will work together with our clients in making sure that they have healthy and stable backups. So those are the individual components. Let's talk about how this all fits in and ties together. Okay, so the very first thing that we do, so when we first install the agent, so usually installing the agent probably takes 10, 15 minutes, and we do this all within probably an hour call. So we install the agent on your system, and we'll set up your initial backup. Your initial backup is a full data backup. So the seed process takes longer than what your subsequent or ongoing backups are going to be because we're backing up everything. Okay. And then once we have that seed complete, we will kick off the backup, and that backup will look for anything new or changing in your environment. And it does that at a block level. So we're extremely efficient in how we do that and getting that data backed up and sent off site. So we take the individual change blocks that have changed, we compress them, we encrypt them. All that is done prior to that data leaving your system. In this case, your IBM Power system. So all that is encrypted prior to leaving your system. Once it does, it stays encrypted, stays compressed, follows along to what we call the active vault here. So this guy would be your active vault, which is your primary vault. And once your vault accepts that data, it does some authentication, places it in a signed storage pool on that vault, and then we'll make a copy and replicate that off to a secondary vault. So throughout this process, there's never any need for human intervention. Once this is set up, everything runs and it's monitored on a either active or passive basis. So this is all set up. There's no one in this type of scenario. There's no one changing tapes. There's no one handling tapes. You don't have a third-party service coming up picking up tapes. So all that manual intervention and all the manual processes that you would have around a traditional tape backup are all eliminated. And so when you eliminate those processes, you are most likely eliminating cost. Just working with a few of our clients just very recently, we've had a couple clients who are spending thousands of dollars on a monthly basis for their tape storage. And then we have, a good majority of our customers are spending a couple $100 for that. But once you get any considerable amount of tapes, you're going to be spending a lot of money, and that's all savings that we can go after by eliminating those processes because that all is not needed. So one of the nice things is bandwidth throttling. So it's very common for us to work with clients that have multiple geographies that are on their systems. So while their US operation is idle, they may have users in China that are working. So they don't necessarily want to flood their network with backup data and impact these other areas of the world and their user communities. So what a nice thing is that we could bandwidth throttle back the bandwidth that Carbonite is using. So if you have a 10 meg pipe or a 20 meg pipe or whatever that may be, we can say, okay, we only are going to use X percent of that capacity. So customers love that because they can control what is being used through Carbonite and through their backup approach. So very nice very nice thing to have as part of the solution. It looks like I got a question, and the question is talking about how quickly does the backup occur to the main vault. So that's a great question. So that comes with some sizing, right? So it depends on how much data you have, your rate of change, how big your connection is to the internet, or maybe I should say maybe a better thing is how your vaults are deployed. Have you backing up locally? Are you, going off site right away? Most of I would say 80% of our IBM I deployments is directly to cloud, but there's nothing on site because it compresses that well and performs that well. Customers don't want to introduce a layer of hardware in the mix there because it just performs very, very well. So once you get through that, we can give you, what we have you do is just from an iSeries perspective, you can just print out a report, a disk usage report that will let us know how much traditional DB2 data you have, what's stored on your IFS. We make some calculations and make some estimates on rate of change and so forth, just by kind of comparing you to some other clients that we have that are maybe have similar size system or a similar ERP package that you're run, same amount of users, and we can come up with an estimate on how much space is going to be stored on the vault, how quickly your backups will run on a nightly basis. So we can kind of share that with you. And we're usually, believe it or not, we're usually pretty darn close. And we size everything out typically from a 3-year perspective. So we'll kind of look at, okay, this is what we're expecting year 1, year 2, and at the end of year 3, we're expecting you to have X amount of space consumed. So hopefully that answers your question. Coming up on the 23-minute mark here. So this is an example of compression. So this is where Carbonite does extremely well. So if you look at this is comparing a traditional backup that still a lot of our clients are doing. So we've been very successful in moving many of them to this approach, but there's still quite a few out there that are kind of sticking to the old ways. So this kind of just compares both approaches. So we have a client that has about a terabyte. I talked about that seed process, which is that initial backup. So we can compress that down to about 125 gig. So that customer, we can take that and compress that down to 125 gigs. So if you do the math, I think I've mentioned 10 to 1. When I do a chart like this, I'm very conservative. So this is an 8 to 1 compression ratio. So 8 to 1 gives you about 125 gig of compression. Traditionally, what we see on the I series is 2 to 4% rate of change on a daily basis. So I went very conservative that this client would have about 5 gig that they would need to back up every day. Typical retention policy is kind of outlined there with 5 dailies, 15 weeklies, 12 monthlies, so it's 32 copies. And then, so if you take the amount of retentions times how much they'll be backing up, it's 160 gig plus the original seed. At the end of year 1, it's 285 gig. Okay. And you compare that to down below, that customer's got the same retention policy. It's 32 terabytes that they're going to be storing on tape somewhere. So very different approach, a lot more efficient with the carbonite approach versus a tape-based approach. But um, so this is kind of gives you an idea of what that looks like from a compression standpoint. And again, this is important for performance and also price, because no matter how you deploy this, because if we're looking at an on-prem solution, that just means you need less licensing, less hardware, versus a cloud where you're just subscribing to less amount of space. So either way, it's a good thing to have a much smaller footprint. So we support, not only do you support obviously we support Windows, Linux, AIX, all the virtual hypervisors of VMware and Hyper-V. Um, so what we find is a lot of our I-Series clients also have critical systems that need to be backed up, and they're sick and tired of using 3 or 4 different backup utilities to support their environment, because the I-Series always had something separate. Um, and we've seen where their customers' physical systems are using a different tool than what their virtual systems are using. And it is just getting super confusing to train their admin staff, pay support costs, and all these different options. So it's very nice to kind of consolidate all this and use one offering. So that's what a lot of our clients have done. So this is a sample configuration here of what we've done for a client. This is an example of a hybrid. So this is a client that has I-Series and Windows, where they would back up locally first to what we call as a express recovery appliance. So it's more of a satellite vault that they back up to locally first and then off-site for DR purposes. So a lot of times this is a choice of the customer, or sometimes this is um, a technical requirement where they may have several. We have deployments that are 40, 50, 60 terabytes worth of space. So if you got that much space, no matter what size of bandwidth you have, there's most likely we're going to recommend that you back up locally first, just to make sure that we're meeting all the backup windows and so forth. So, and the purpose of this vault here for this example is to really be a buffer between between the local backups and then sending them off site. So it's really meant for getting those backups done very quickly. So it only stores up to 7 days retention, and then all the four set of retentions are stored off of the other active and passive vaults. So this is another example of a enterprise-wide deployment where the customer had multiple locations, a lot of international locations that all were using different backup solutions for the different branch offices that they have, if you put it that way. These were all manufacturing plants. So they were very concerned on data loss. They were very concerned about these locations being properly backed up and having restore capabilities. A lot of these folks were in real rural areas, and some of them were kind of prone to weather issues or kind of natural disaster type areas, like hurricanes or floods. So they wanted to put something that was an enterprise-wide solution. So this is where we'd had backups being performed locally very quickly, and then locally here, and then backed up to their headquarters, which then went to a second facility. So we're here in Michigan, so this was actually a Michigan deployment here at the headquarters level, and then they had locations, as you see, all across the globe. So this was a very successful deployment. This has been in place for about 4 years now, and they are actually a huge reference for this type of solution. So just another way to think about things from an on-prem perspective. They had some pretty savvy technical resources that were internal to their organization, and they were wanting to take this on and not go the cloud route. So, and they've been very successful in doing so. So just another option. So disaster recovery. So what we've done is taken the carbonite backup, and then we have coupled that with our system recovery services offering. Um, so system recovery services is Data National providing the resources for you to get your environment up and going in event of an outage. So if you were to have, let's say, you were an iSeries client and you're backing up to our cloud, we would be able to allocate resources in event of an outage or disaster. We would be restoring from our vault to some allocated resources here. So we would spin up an iSeries LPAR where we would restore from our vault. So you're no longer having to commute with a tape in your hand and sit in front of a rack and do all that. We can actually initiate the restore on your behalf as soon as you declare. So just a lot different approach than a traditional tape-based approach. So, this is this is pretty much from an illustration standpoint how this works. So you're backing up to our cloud on a daily basis, um, and if something was to occur, you're calling us to declare an outage. We're initiating a restore as quickly as possible. We're setting up communications. We're setting up most of our clients are setting up we have a VP IPsec tunnel that we would set up between them and our location here for their user community to connect to the systems. Some of our larger clients have brought in dedicated lines for this, so you can certainly do that as well. And so we build their environment, get that restored up and going. So we have recovered customers from hurricanes in this. So not this last summer this most recent fall, but in the fall of 2017, I think it was Hurricane Irma. We have actually recovered a client, an iSeries client in the Georgia area from the hurricane using this approach. So a couple things. I know I'm just slightly past the half-hour mark. Just want to touch base on a couple different things. We do remote testing. So we do. You don't need to travel for testing. So if you are with some of the old school providers where you're having to travel and you get 48 hours for a test, and we're very, very different. So we do remote testing. So most of our clients can test remotely. We'll initiate the restore for them, give them connection, and they can actually go through their test scripts and do that remotely. One of the nice things about us is that we actually offer base package a 5-day testing period. So you actually get a full week to test as opposed to, again, 48 hours. And we're very flexible on any types of changes to your protection level that needs to be addressed. So if you need to upgrade if you recently purchased a company and your requirements have changed, or maybe you added a shift to your environment, now you've lost your backup window. So you're really struggling with that, and that's when maybe you want to look at some type of real-time replication where you're moving your backups now to a secondary or target node or host. All right, so the last thing is endpoint. It looks like I have a question. I will address that in just a second. Endpoint is the capability to back up your individual PCs, laptops, any types of mobile devices. So this has been a great offering. We've seen a lot of our iSeries customers sign on up with us for the server backup portion of it, and then later on they love the technology, and this solution works very similar in terms of compressing data, deduplication. This is something that we install a small piece of software in each laptop, and then it runs in the background and vaults their backups, their change data over to a cloud infrastructure on an increment basis. It could be every 15 minutes, it could be daily basis, whatever you want that to do. And the nice thing about this is what clients like is all centrally managed. So once it's deployed on a laptop, the user does not have to do anything to it. All that's deployed centrally with the users with very little having to do with the user. It can be we can set up groups within the solution, so you can have your sales teams have different backup definitions. Your folks in finance have something different. Each of them may have different backup needs. You can control what is being backed up, what types of files, what type of data is being backed up. One of the nice things about this is it has location tracking. So if you were to lose or leave a laptop behind, you can actually go down to the street view, kind of like Google Maps, and see where your laptop's at. You can also do remote wipe. So if your laptop doesn't seem like it's going to be recoverable, you can wipe that remotely as soon as you get an IP sync or IP connection. Very cool stuff. So this ranges anywhere from $6 to $8 a month, depending on what option you go with. So as I mentioned, I have a full deep dive, and I think it's the end of January on this. So stay tuned if you like to go into a little deeper on the endpoint side. We're certainly going to be doing that here in the next probably just again after the holidays, and we'll actually do a live demo. I have it running on my PC here. Okay, my contact information is there. With my email, I do have one other question that popped up here. The question is having to do on pricing. And this is very common. So the question is, how is this priced basically? So from a backup perspective, as I mentioned, we're backing up on compressed footprint. So we do some sizing. We look at what your footprint is, and we size that accordingly and price that accordingly. From a DR perspective, we look at what types of resources you're going to need from a DR perspective. Are you going to, how many cores you need active, how much memory, how much disk do you need? Are there any special software products that you would need above and beyond the traditional system-related products? So we kind of take all that in consideration and we price that out for DR. And a lot of times we just glump that all together, bake it into one monthly cost, and package it accordingly. And that's how we typically do that. So packages start out at about $295 a month and go up from there, depending on what you need and if you want DR to be added or not. Okay. So I think that's all the other questions I had. My contact information is here. If you need anything else or like to get into a little more information, we have a lot of customers in budget mode right now. So if you're looking just to get some budget information, I'll be more than happy to work with you, have someone on my team work with you and pull all that together and give you what you need. So again, thank you for your attention on this December day, and take care, everyone. Happy holidays and Happy New Year. Thank you.